You're on there. Lights on.
Call the January 21st, 2025 Auburn City Council workshop to order. The first item tonight is a joint workshop with the Planning Board relative to the bona fide ag ordinance. Mr. Stockford is here with us, the city attorney. I think we'll proceed. I'll especially for those that are watching from home, I'll provide some context to the discussion. Mr. Stockford will discuss the legal opinion that he provided to the city manager, and then we can entertain any questions the council or the planning board has. There's members also from the Ag Committee that were invited. You certainly will be able to ask questions as well. So to provide the background on this item, the prior council, as people will recall, proposed an elimination of the income standard in the AGRP zoning district. There was some pushback from the community who felt that would be detrimental to agricultural use and would cause urban sprawl. So the council spent quite a bit of time working on this issue. They eliminated the income standard with the enactment of a bona fide farming, agricultural, recreation, and natural resources standard. You'll recall that recently we formed a committee to propose criteria that would be used in making a determination regarding a bona fide activity. And one member of the committee submitted a minority report that said, in part stated that the report, meaning the committee's report, the report misrepresents the requirements under section 6145A1. It claims that determining a bona fide farming, agricultural, recreational, natural resource use must first involve the designation of a principal use for the parcel. That interpretation was contrary to the understanding of the ad hoc committee or of the staff. When the ad hoc committee presented their report, most of the discussion really centered around what the current ordinance is, not discussing the report relative to the bona fide criteria. And we're likely to have before the council in the future proposed ordinance language relative to the criteria, so it's important that there's a common understanding of what the current ordinance says. The committee, ad hoc committee, was not charged with presenting amendments to the underlying ordinance, and any proposed ordinance relative to the criteria that would come forward wouldn't propose to modify the underlying ordinance as well. So it's important that there's a common understanding amongst the SNRB and the Ag Working Group, the council, the planning board about what the current ordinance says. So to that end, legal was asked. The city manager made a request of the city attorney to review the current ordinance and provide guidance relative to the proper interpretation of that ordinance. So with that background, Mr. Stockford, if you would like to review the legal opinion that you provided, that would be helpful.
Sure, thanks.
You have to push.
I think you have to push that one. Yeah, sorry, Dan.
You got to hold it down.
Bring it closer. Yeah.
Thanks. So in law school, we learned that when you're interpreting a statute or an ordinance, the first thing you do is you look at the plain language of the text. And here, the language is that a detached dwelling, one-family detached dwelling, is allowed in the district provided that the dwelling is accessory to farming or agricultural operations, recreational uses, or natural resource uses, and subject to additional restrictions. The term accessory there is in reference to specific uses that are allowed in the district: farming or agricultural, recreation, or natural resources. So it's clear from the context of the statute that the use of the term accessory is with respect to an accessory use. And in order to determine what the meaning of accessory use, the first place to go would be in the definitions section of the ordinance. And the definitions section at section 60-2 of the zoning ordinance provides that accessory use means a subordinate use of land or building which is customarily incidental and subordinate to the principal use of the land and which is located on the same lot with the principal building or use. So based on the language of the Agriculture and Resource Protection District chapter of the ordinance, and interpreting that in light of the definition of what an accessory use is, it's our opinion that the principal use of a property needs to be for one of those specified purposes: agricultural, natural resources, or recreational. We believe that that interpretation is supported by very specific language in the ordinance that requires that the planning director review a land use plan for the property and make specific findings about the use of the property for those specific purposes. And there is additional language in the ordinance that provides that the right to continue to use the property for the dwelling use is subject to continued compliance with that section that requires an agricultural, recreation, or natural resource use. So for all those reasons, we believe that the ordinance requires that in order for a dwelling structure to be built on the property, there has to be a determination that the principal use is one of those specified uses. So.
Thank you. Questions from the council, planning board? Mr. Trask?
Yes, I guess, actually I was the author of the dissension, so, I appreciate you adding, the hook from the, definition of accessory use, given that you stated that certainly the ordinance does not specify the parcel as being accessory to the parcel. It actually, the language says it's accessory to the farming use. I guess one of the things that we, during the workshops, struggled with was really how to get to an understanding of whether or not something is principal use or not. And certainly, if something, especially the parcel, because we have a lot of large parcels that maybe aren't doing a lot, but yet the owner wants to take 10 out of 40, for example, and have a plan and farm it, and which in theory is, and then want to potentially have a house on it. So we have the house, which is supporting the principal use of the plan, but yet the plan is only a quarter of the overall acreage. And so then there was a lot of conversation around, okay, well then it's not a principal use of the lot because it's not greater than, say, 50%. And really there was a lot of struggling around, or at least in my mind, and I heard other people express this as well, that, you know, are we actually able to, is the city able to actually define whether or not a parcel's principal use is ag or whatever, and how do we actually define that? Because, and maybe it's a different question, maybe it's something that we didn't actually answer during this process, but I think that there's, I have a concern by saying that the parcel's principal use needs to be these things when we don't really have a clear way, in my opinion, of defining whether or not that's a principal use, especially on the larger lots or even the smaller lots. You know, because we don't say that it has to be more than 50% or something. So there's nothing that the city really has to go back to when the city planner is looking to say, is this really legitimate or not, to then determine whether or not, you know, if that's the first marker, we've got issues right out of the gate.
The way I would respond to that is, you know, it's not always possible to address everything in ordinance language. I think the efforts that were made by the committee to identify criteria are helpful, and you know, I think it does make sense to move to incorporate that in some fashion into the ordinance over time. But ultimately, you know, because it's not possible to sort of lay out every standard always, I think the application and interpretation of principal use will really have to be developed based on the specific factual scenarios that are found. And obviously, it's important that the planning board make, you know, specific findings to support any determination, you know, or staff, depending on who's making the determination. But it's important that specific findings be made to support any determination of whether a parcel is principally used for those purposes or not. And you know, the enforceability of those, or you know, whether those are upheld, will, you know, ultimately come down to interpretation of the ordinance and application of the findings to the facts. So.
Other questions by the council or the planning board or members of the Ag Committee? Council Mills?
You mentioned something that there's an ongoing requirement, and when you were talking that if that has to be an ongoing use of the land to stay in compliance.
The current ordinance provides that in no case shall any residence constructed under the provisions of this section after the effective date of the amended ordinance from which the section is derived continue to be occupied as a residence if the lot upon which the residence is constructed fails to meet the requirements of the elsewhere in the ordinance. And the cross-referenced sections of the ordinance deal with establishment that the principal use is for a natural resource, recreation, or agricultural purpose.
So if the principal use now is just a house, because it's been there for 50 years, but it's in the ag zone, then it's a non-compliant house, because they're not doing ag and resource protection or anything else. They've just got a big yard.
I think that would depend on when the ordinance was amended to incorporate that requirement.
Yeah, I think that it's important to note that in the ordinance, there's a distinction for new dwellings, right? So I think in the case you've described, if there is an existing house and it's in the ag zone, there's no requirement that they meet the principal use standard because the dwelling existed before the ordinance. So my understanding of what Mr. Stockford is talking about would be for the construction of new dwellings in the agricultural and resource protection zone. Is that correct?
Correct. I mean, I think effectively, anything that was built before the ordinance was adopted would be effectively grandfathered.
Other questions,
So just to
Mr. Trask?
just to add on to that. So basically, the way that it's structured right now, and obviously, we talked about potentially, are there other changes that need to be reviewed and to be looked at long term? We are in a situation where if one would be approved and 10, 15 years from now, the husband and wife decided that they're no longer physically capable, you're saying that based on if they decide to stop that operation, they would not be in compliance and therefore would be asked to, I don't know what the process would be, but, are we talking about kicking people off, out of their house? I guess it's a concern.
So I think it's a valid observation, and for those that attended the planning board and more importantly the city council meetings when this ordinance was debated, that issue came up repeatedly, but the council adopted the ordinance as it is now, which seems to me to say that if the principal use ceases, your right to occupy the dwelling also ceases. Clearly, the city has not had to address that, right? We haven't had a new dwelling built pursuant to this new ordinance, and all that would have to happen before there would be a discontinuance. But it's certainly I think it's certainly a problematic issue, and I think it was identified as a problematic issue for those that were on the council at the time. But that I think, Mr. Trask, that would be my understanding of the current ordinance as well. Councilor Geary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was thinking, if I had a piece of land in ag, I want to do farms and sell vegetables or canned vegetables for myself. In 20 years, if I'm not able to do that, can I go back and say, okay, I can't do any more farming because I can't do it? Can I go into one of those other divisions, like you said, for recreation or conservation or things? Would that allow me to stay in my house?
I believe it would. Whether it would have to come back to the city for a change of use, I haven't looked closely enough at the ordinance to know that. But as long as it remains accessory to one of the permitted uses within the district, one of the permitted principal uses, then I would agree with that.
And that, to clarify, that could happen at any time. Someone could come in, get a plan approved for a principal use, build a dwelling, 18 months later, switch to another principal use that the planning director under the ordinance, I think, would find met the criteria, and it seems that you could do that.
My understanding is that you'd also have, the director would have to approve the new plan, and that would be the first hurdle, would be for that individual.
And should a time be put in there? Because you were saying 6 months or a year, we change our mind, can't do the farming, and now we're trying something else. Or we used farming or something to get our foot in the door so that we could build a house on our property.
Well, I think that that's the substantive issue that the prior council wrestled with, which is someone coming in, presenting a plan for a qualifying principal use, getting the permission to build the dwelling. As soon as the dwelling's built, stops, And so I think clearly this part of the ordinance is something that will need additional work in the future, because I don't think anyone attends or would want, in the scenario you've described, somebody who has a qualifying use, let's say it's a farm, and they farm for 40 years, and they're 75 years old and decide they can't farm anymore, that people would want them to be evicted from the property. So, like I said, that was, I think, a very difficult piece of the ordinance when it was discussed before, but that's how it reads today, and probably that part could stand some further attention to clarify that.
As memory serves, when we're speaking about it with the planning board, I do believe, I mean, you have an infinite number of what ifs, and I think it just came down to, we'll handle that when it's a problem, because there's any number of, like Councilor Gary brought up, that changes that can happen in your life that weren't planned in the first place, not just getting older, and just tackle them when it occurs.
Other questions? Mr. DeBear.
Thank you very much, Mayor. So I'm the newest member of the planning board, and I honestly thought this meeting was going to be to discuss the word bona fide. They're not defined in the ordinance, and I think
Yeah, so that's a really good observation. Bona fide does not appear in the definitions. I think that up to this point, the city has used a dictionary definition. I think Councilor Milks pointed this out at a prior meeting. I don't think that the issues that the ad hoc committee dealt with were so much about defining what bona fide itself, the term meant. It was, how do you make the determination if the activity on the land that the owner wants to engage in is a bona fide farming, agricultural, natural resource, or recreation activity. And I think that was the impetus for the ad hoc committee, and they've provided their report with some recommendations about criteria that could be used for the director to make those determinations. So I think that it's likely, based on that report, at some point here in the future, there'll be suggested ordinance language, and the normal process would be that the council would refer that to the planning board for review and recommendation, and then it would come back before the council to try to put more structure and transparency around that. I think that the staff, one of the challenges the staff has had is, how do people in the community know how they're going to make this decision, right? So I think it would be preferable to have criteria so that the public understood how the city was, the process they would go through, and the types of criteria they would use to make this decision.
Mr. Mayor, you had, I certainly agree with the reference to, because I heard the council session with Mr. Milks with regard to the dictionary definition for bona fide. You had mentioned that there were no houses that have been built since this ordinance has passed. Is that correct?
Well, Mr. Cousins is here, but I believe that to be correct, right? That there's been no new dwellings built pursuant to the new ordinance when the finding of the bona fide activity has been made. Is that correct?
There have been some permitted. I think there were 2 permitted. I can get the exact numbers. I don't think there's been any that have been finished and occupied yet, but there's at least one that should be pretty close.
Yeah, I'd stand corrected then. Apparently there are 2 that have provided plans that were approved.
I mentioned it just because if we do leverage the definition, sort of the dictionary definition of bona fide, as you know, it's something that is legitimate. That's my intention. I meant to go fishing, so I brought my rod and my reel, and I have a lure, and I'm actually fishing versus going out and enjoying the sunshine on the boat. I guess I would have expected to see more interest and potentially more applications come forth. But what we had heard and what we struggled with during the subcommittee was putting definitions around what bona fide means, and is there a certain volume that needs to be done? Is there a certain income that needs to be attained? Is there a certain number of documents that need to be submitted to the city in order for them to determine whether or not something is bona fide or not? And to that's kind of how the checklist kind of was developed as part of that. Was there any review of what was being asked for to determine whether or not it was within sort of whether or not there's any legal issues with, requesting certain financial plans and things that could be very proprietary by the city relative to what they may be asking for to determine whether or not something is bona fide or not?
So just to be clear, the city attorney was not asked to review the ad hoc committee's report. The way the process would work is if a proposed ordinance comes forward, to put criteria into the ordinance, at that point, the city attorney would review that and provide guidance to the city. But we haven't got to that point yet. There isn't any at this point, there's not an actual proposal of what the criteria that would be inserted in the ordinance might be.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for explaining that. I was curious as to why only a part of the concerns that were raised during the in the document that I provided was asked for. Thank you.
Other questions or Ag Committee or as well? If not, I do have one question that I wanted to follow up on. In a couple prior meetings, a resident raised the concern that pursuant to state statute, the Farm and Open Space Tax Law, which is 36 MRSA subchapter 10, that if a property owner earned at least $2,000 in annual gross income, they didn't mention the time frame, but within the statute, it has to be 2 of the preceding 5 years. If they have the $2,000 in annual gross income from agricultural products, that in and of itself would suffice under the ordinance to be a bona fide farming or agricultural operation. And the city council actually reviewed this very proposal in 2020 and did not enact that, but I don't know that that's determinative relative to the current ordinance. Would I be correct that if a property owner met the what ostensibly is a state tax provision and had $2,000 in gross income, that in and of itself wouldn't qualify necessarily as a bona fide farming or agricultural operation? Would that be understanding be correct?
Yeah, my understanding is that standard is not incorporated into the ordinance, so it's not a specific criteria.
Correct.
For evaluating whether farming agriculture is the principal use, but it certainly would be appropriate for staff and the planning board to consider that, but it wouldn't be determinative of whether the principal use falls within those specific categories.
Right. So if they were earning income from an agricultural or farming process, whether they were applying under the Farm and Open Space Tax Law relative to the assessment or not, that would be a factor. Earning income from that activity be one potential factor that the director could take into consideration when making the determination.
Correct, but not, I don't think that would necessarily control by itself. So.
Any other final, Council Weissman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Council, for coming here and answering questions. One question is, I've been very vocal about subsistence farming as one of the primary uses, and I attended as somebody would be using it to live off the land. and that's their intended use, and then building a house afterwards. Do you think it's important for our staff to have, sorry, I just got over a cold, the staff to have certain standards that they can review in regards to subsistence farming that they could use that would make this applicable, that they could build a house on if they're doing that type of farming?
Yeah, I think that would be, certainly the ordinance as it currently is drafted doesn't preclude subsistence farming. And it seems to me that that would be a potential permitted use within the district. I think it's worth it for the city in evaluating any future ordinance amendments or, sort of more informal guidance to staff to potentially take those issues into consideration.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments or questions from the council, the planning board?
Mr. Mayor, just based on the comments and the questions related to the clarification of the bona fide, ask if you could just review the next steps so that we're all on the same page of what the understanding of how that's moving forward.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things that are happening. I think at the staff level, they'll continue to review any submissions that come in pursuant to the ordinance as Mr. Stockford has described. There'll be a continuing effort to review the ad hoc committee's report and at some point present proposed ordinance language that would incorporate criteria. I don't have a time frame for that. I would not, it's not going to be like in the next couple weeks, but I would expect some time here, perhaps late winter or early spring, we'll have something before the council, and then, of course, it'll get referred to the planning board.
Thanks.
Any other, Councilor Walker?
Yes. With the laws that were in place for the ag zone for many years, we had many farmers that had gotten on the upper age where they couldn't farm any longer. And many of them are still living on their farmland, which may be, 10 acres, 20 acres, or 100. And I don't think the city has ever approached any of them to kick them off the land. Right. I think we would have an awful hard time bringing forward some new rules and regulations and just leaving that someday to be looked at in the future when maybe we've got some people that are not happy with the way we kind of open-ended that rule. So I would hope that if we're going to move forward with that open-ended rule, that we would end it and not leave it open-ended. So I think if you're retired and you can retire on your land, at that point, whatever you do, whether it's farming or you're just retiring, I think the option should be that you can live there until you've passed on. So I'm hoping we don't leave that open-ended for the future to decide if we were right or wrong doing this.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Mr. Cousins is here, and we work through the issues from the ad hoc committee. It seems like that would be an important issue to include. People that aged out from farms in the past didn't have this requirement, right? This is new in the ordinance, but I think is an excellent suggestion. And if there's anything that comes forward about the criteria, it seemed like it would be a good time to try to address that issue as well. Councilor Platt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is a little more broad and overarching. My understanding of this exercise was for the city to clean up the language behind this so that it wasn't so vague for a potential applicant in the ag zone. So my question is, with your I understand you're not addressing every issue in the report, but with your familiarity with the report, are there any other areas that we should be looking into that may open us up for liability? Have we accomplished our goal of decreasing possibly the liability of having kind of a very vague process here? Are there any other items that you as a lawyer think we should be focusing on?
Yeah, and I haven't done an exhaustive review of the report. I did read it, but I think that, you know, based on my review, that I think I think it's an important work that's been done, and it will be helpful and important for the city as it moves forward in applying the ordinance to have those guidelines. You know, I think preference would be that they're reflected in ordinance, but I think even if they are not reflected in ordinance, if those are sort of the guidelines that the city is following as it applies the ordinance, I think it will make any decision that comes out of the, either from staff or the planning board, more defensible in a court of law, to have followed clear guidelines as far as how the ordinance is going to be applied.
Yep, Mr. Jacks.
Is the ad hoc committee going to continue to meet?
The ad hoc committee is fulfilled their role, so at this point, I would not see additional meetings of the ad hoc committee. Other questions or comments? If not, Mr. Trask?
Yeah, I guess I appreciate Councilor Walker's statement, because I think that as we continue to review and kind of button up what's there, we also need to consider, okay, so now that individual, that family has, they're retired, they're moving on, the property is now for sale. And, there's no requirement that as part of that purchase and sale that, based on the ordinance, there probably would, one, they shouldn't have stopped doing what they were doing, and now the buyer needs to be able to continue to that, but we don't have them attest to that. It's not part of the P&S. So I think we just need to kind of, as we think about how we want to close that up, that we need to think of those other ripple effects as well.
Any further questions or comments, Council Walker?
Yeah, I got another, I know there's 2 or 3 different people that in the south end of Auburn that own like 9 acres or 8.5 acres. And I know when we discussed this a few years ago and get into where we are today, a lot of people were thinking that they would be able to possibly build a house with a plan saying that they could farm on their own land and farm enough to make their living, for instance, not living, but make it so that we're all getting over our colds. Make it so that they could show that they could feed their family off their land. And we were hoping that that was going to be part of being able to build a house.
Any other questions or comments? If not, thank you very much to the planning board members that attended, and for the members of the SNRB and Ag Committee. We appreciate you coming in for the joint workshop tonight. The next item on the agenda is an executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA, Section 405(6)C, to discuss an economic development matter. There's no action expected after this. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Councilor Cowan, seconded by Councilor Wisner. Vote will be by show of hands. All in favor? 6 having voted in the affirmative and 1 absent. The council will be in executive session. The January 21, 2025 Auburn City Council meeting will be called to order. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. If we could have the councilors introduce themselves, starting with Councilor Geary.
Good evening. My name is Belinda Gary. I'm a city councilor at large.
Good evening, Rick Whiting, Ward 1 City Councilor.
Good evening, Tim Cowan, Ward 2 City Councilor.
Good evening, Steve Milks, Ward 3 City Council.
Good evening, Jeff Harmon, Mayor.
Good evening, Ben Wisner, City Councilor, Ward 4.
Good evening, Leroy Walker, Councilman, Ward 5.
Hello, Adam Platts, City Council at Large.
Phil Kroll, City Manager.
Thank you. There's one consent item tonight, Order 07012125. This is appointing Brian Cullen to the SNRB Sustainability Working Group. Is there a motion?
Motion to move.
Moved by Councilor
Second.
Walker, seconded by Councilor Cowan. Vote will be by show of hands. All in favor? Opposed? 7 having voted in the affirmative, none in the negative. The motion is adopted. The next item is approval of the January 6, 2024 regular City Council meeting minutes. Are there any errors or corrections? Not seeing any. Is there a motion?
Motion to accept.
Moved by Councilor Walker. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Cowan. Vote will be by show of hands. All in favor? Opposed? Councilor Geary? You're in favor? And
I raised it.
you're abstaining because you weren't here?
Oh, right, I'm abstaining.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm abstaining too. Yeah, okay, so to clarify for the clerk, five voted in the affirmative, none in the negative, and 2 abstained because they were absent. The next item is communications, presentations, and recognitions. We'll have a year-end review regarding economic development and planning and permitting by Mr. Cousins and Mr. Brent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. It's a 2-part presentation, so we'll start with economic development, Jay Brenchick, and then we'll go through some of the permitting numbers for the year.
I'm sorry, hold on 1 second. Where's the top lower? Oh, here we go. Okay, sorry about that. So much of this, I think City Council is aware of what economic development's been up to for the year. But I think you're not aware of all of the results of our efforts, or you know that we advertised in the paper and on social media, but I don't know if you know what the impressions were reached, that type of thing. So that's what this presentation is about. So some slides I'll go over very quickly and others I'll go a little slower. I think feel free to ask questions as we go. So as you know from last year, economic development has had a concentration on manufacturing, and this comes from our strategic plan from 2019, the strategic growth goal 2, which asks for develop clear identity for our industrial sector, promote and identify industry clusters, and develop linkages and connectivity. So we began having our meetings with manufacturers in 2023. The group worked to identify and prioritize industry challenges, and the big challenge that we've been working on, but there's been others, has been workforce issues. The good thing about this group is that we have been bringing in guest speakers for our manufacturers to hear from. And what I want to point out about this sampling of list of guest speakers is normally a manufacturer might get to meet with a representative from the Maine Technology Institute or Maine International Trade Center or perhaps the Manufacturers Extension Partnership. But this group is actually hearing from the president of these organizations. So the president's taking time to come meet with our manufacturers, which I think is important to point out, the level of presenters and guest speakers that we have at this group. As part of our focus on workforce, we added content to Go Auburn website. We added a living and working in Auburn page that our manufacturers can use and other employers can use when they are trying to attract workforce to our community. A lot of times they want kind of a welcome package like what is now grown and been done for the city, and that will be added to this website. But on top of that, just a page on manufacturing, the level of manufacturing we're here, and that was meant to serve as helping us create an identity, which we have kind of two identities. We started with the manufacturing and distribution hub of Maine, which we've become known for. And as we move forward, as we put the pieces together, we're not ready to really launch and market it, but we will be the tech hub. So with our focus on workforce, the segment we decided to focus on were new Mainers, because we have so many new Mainers in our community, a lot of them looking for jobs. Manufacturing's tucked away where people don't see it. So our manufacturers had said they really didn't know how to reach out to new Mainers, so we started doing facility tours for new Mainers. That worked fairly well, but truthfully, when we brought in our workforce analysts for the city, that's when the program really picked up. And to date, I don't know of any community that's been as highly involved and hired 150 and retained 150 new Mainers to the manufacturing sector. Now, admittedly, about 100 of those went to Pan-Am Surface Systems because they were really ready to take them on. But when you consider we have about 49 manufacturers within a 10-15 minute drive of the exit, there were also another 50 that were placed. So that's a number that's really gotten the attention of the state. As we've hired new Mainers, the other issue and goal was English as a second language was a challenge. So we partnered with Auburn Adult Ed and created workplace English classes. So the way it worked at Pan-Am in particular was they did this between their first and second shift. So the employees could attend the class without having to go to another location. They could finish their shift or come early for their shift and get workplace English. The English was general conversation, but it was also very much geared toward their workplace for what they had to learn to do their job. This picture that you're seeing here is the class graduating last spring. The other issue that wasn't just affecting new Mainers, just affecting all Mainers, is transportation. We worked with Western Maine Transportation Services to help them create their WorkLinks pilot program, which is a curb-to-curb transportation service. It costs $3 each way to use this service. Currently, the service is open to all of Lewiston and Auburn, but it's primarily being used by our manufacturers in Auburn, which I think speaks volumes to the value of bringing a group together on a monthly basis, making sure they're taking advantage of the resources around them. And then the strategic plan called for bringing attention to our industry sectors, and this one that we're working clearly manufacturing. So we decided to celebrate Manufacturing Month, and not just celebrate it in Auburn, but to do it in partnership with the Manufacturers Association of Maine and have it be a statewide event. What you're looking at in the bottom right corner of this slide is the logo that Liz, our Director of Communications, created for Auburn to represent manufacturing within the city. We started the month with the mayoral proclamation. And then each week throughout the month of October, we did manufacturing tours for facilities. We did Auburn Manufacturing, PacGen, Panorama and Strainwright. All of the tours were completely sold out, so to speak. We asked each manufacturer how many they could accommodate. Some could accommodate up to 50, and so we had 50, and others were about 20, 25. And what was great is we've done tours with students, and we've done tours for new Mainers. This was opened up to just any citizen who wanted to come, as well as our elected officials and city staff, and we got a great deal of participation in this. Then we also did our marketing campaign, primarily social media as well as through the newspaper. And we promote ourselves as Maine's manufacturing hub. We just did general appreciation messages. We had interactive ads that talked about manufacturing in Auburn, but also in the state. We also had a branded content article about how the City of Auburn became Maine's manufacturing and distribution hub. And then we held our statewide event at Central Maine Community College. There were 170 attendees from as far away as Machias and Bridgeton and Portland. And then just a few weeks ago, Panorama won the Governor's Award for Business Excellence in the heritage industry sector. What's important to point out here is the reason they won the award is that they utilized the programs that our manufacturing group created. All of the workforce efforts, the English classes, the attracting of new Mainers, the transportation. So all of those things were the things that went into the nomination, and they were selected for utilizing these programs. Now, the impact of the media campaign. I'm not going to get too deep into analytics, because I think on our final slide, you'll see the part that everybody can understand, the percentage that our visitors rose for our Go Auburn website and social media. But here on the article that was written about Auburn, we had 557 page views, 446 unique users. So the page views are the number of times that the page was viewed and actually interacted with. Unique visitors are new people going to that article. The average time on the page was 50 seconds, which is actually pretty good because it was a 1-minute article. Native impressions are the ads that ran on the homepage of the newspaper. And so we had over 100,000 impressions. CTR at the bottom there is click-through rate. The standard to expect for click-through rate is 0.01, and we were at 0.07. Partner well impressions are actually the ads and the links at the end of the branded content article. And for that one, we had almost 14,000 impressions and a click-through rate of 0.36. And then for the city's the newspaper social media results for Facebook and LinkedIn were 12,000 total impressions, 157 reactions, 69 clicks. And then LinkedIn, 635 total impressions, 26 clicks, 15 reactions, and some reposts. So then you have, we did a mobile takeover of the paper with homepage ads and all of that. The takeover resulted in 22,000 impressions. The targeted display ads had 60,000 impressions, and the Sun Journal website header ads, the ads that when you first go to open up your email, you see the ad right there. That was 125,000 impressions, which is actually pretty impressive. And so impressions refers to the number of times some digital content was actually placed onto a phone or a other device. So this is where the part that we can all, understand a bit better, where site sessions were up by 70% to goauburn.maine for the month of October. Unique visitors were up 49%. Direct visitors, in other words, somebody who either Googled or typed in our address, was up 142%. The other is that they spent almost 7 minutes on the website, which is quite a long time, especially when you consider they were spending most of their time on the manufacturing page. That manufacturing page had links to it, to the Maine Manufacturers Association, as well as opportunities for people to sign up for the tours, but also to apply for jobs. Social media for the city, as averse to the Sun Journal, we had 19,000 views, a reach of 13,000, and 471 interactions, which is, I think, quite high. Here is the part of the overall impact that I actually think is the most important. When we first started having our manufacturers meetings, we had maybe 25% of our manufacturers were taking advantage of some kind of program offered through the state or federal government. Some might be working with the University of Maine, others might be getting a grant from Maine Technology Institute, which is federal dollars. Now, every manufacturer, which is 30 of them that participate in these meetings, every single one of them is receiving or in the process of receiving some kind of assistance. Many of them working with the Rue Institute on artificial intelligence projects, others working with the University of Maine. One thing that I find to be great is when the University of Maine Advanced Manufacturing and the Rue Institute visit with our manufacturers, they're now doing it together upon my request, saying, why don't you guys come and visit our companies together so you can figure out how to work together? And that's what they're doing, and they're starting to now do that throughout the state. So this slide, while looking least impressive, is actually the impressive part of all of this. This results in dollars being brought back into our community. It results in jobs being created. It results in our manufacturers just being happy being here. So, what is to come in 2025? We're going to continue all of the efforts and all of the things that we talked about from this past year. Upon request of our manufacturers, we've invited Lewiston manufacturers to join our group. And we're doing those invitations through the City of Lewiston Economic Development, so it's in partnership. The other thing that you will see more of this year is greater inclusion of Auburn economic development in state level initiatives. One of the first things that we'll be involved with is the governor has set a task force on AI, and they've asked Auburn Economic Development to participate in this task force. And the task force is there to try to find opportunities as well as challenges for AI for both our employers and our citizens, and what we can do to capitalize on those opportunities and what we can do to mitigate the challenges. And so I think being asked at the state level to participate in something like this is very important, because I now understand it came through the suggestion of the Rue Institute as well as the University of Maine. So we're drawing those kinds of connections that we hadn't had in the past. We're also working on, I know you're well aware of the Tech Hub designation from the state at the federal level, and of course we've created a Tech Hub here in Auburn. We're working on being able to be a part of that consortium that is put together the Tech Hub for the state. So this will hopefully help to put us more on par with Brunswick Landing and some of these other assets throughout the state. We've all known that we're an asset, we've just never positioned ourselves properly with state government to really be a part of all that. The other thing we started this year, I know you folks are familiar with the Maine Community Energy Redevelopment Program, which is actually on our end an effort that Economic Development won for the city, but Eric is heading up the efforts for, and this will be coming out in the spring, the results of this, and it's going to dovetail and bring together the housing study that HRNA is doing for the city, as well as they are also doing a study for us and looking at some of our industrial properties, doing some assessments, bringing all of that together. On the industrial side, for sure, there's going to be a dashboard created that we can use to help analyze our sites, to help us move forward in actually getting some of our sites developed, not necessarily city-owned properties, but getting some of these privately owned properties online. And that is it for economic development. Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Bruncheck? Council Platt.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Jay, for that presentation. I was curious if you had an update on, does any of this relate to the new, was it the tech and bioproducts overlay district that we authorized? I know that you didn't bring that up, but I was curious if there was any relationship between the progress that we're making with our manufacturers and the new overlay district that we had.
Yeah, so all of this falls within the tech hub. It's all happening within the overlay. We're still putting together all of the facets of the tech hub overlay, so I tend to not highlight and talk about it a lot, but yes, this is directly related. So in order to have a tech hub, some of the things you need to have in place through conversations with the state and federal government, as well as the university and the Rue Institute, is you need to have some programming, which is what we're doing with our guest speaker series. You need to have programming in place. You need to have a geographic area defined, which we've done that. You need to also have sites within that geographic area defined, and that's what we're doing through the Maine Community Energy Redevelopment Program. And at some point you do have to have some incentives which we can create, which would actually come from the TIF funds, but that would be customized and made understandable for those in the biotech field.
Other questions? Mr. Council Cowan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not a question, just a comment. I think this is great work, and congratulations to all your hard work, Jay, as well as everyone else has been involved. These are some really impressive and exciting opportunities moving forward. So thanks for all your efforts.
Thank you.
Thanks. Other questions or comments? Just a comment. Mr. Manager.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just want to, appreciate that, Councilor Cowan. I think that Jay's very humble, but let me tell you, he's been the driving force in this. I want to say in 2022, maybe late 2021, Jay came to me and said, for him to now pivot, he's working a lot on downtown and some of the development there, but really to pivot to our manufacturers was to make our manufacturing industry in Auburn stronger, so that then becomes the spotlight for others to want to be part of that, right? And so Jay's been able to do that. He's very well recognized within the University of Maine, the Rue Institute, as well as the governor's office on the work that he's doing. So when he says Auburn Economic Development was it requested to be part of that task, Jerry's requested to be part of that task force because of the work that he's doing. So I just want to commend him for that work, and it's just been outstanding.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Cousins.
Thank you. I should have gone first. I had a tough act to follow on permitting reports. 2024 was a good year from a permit perspective. This is permit values on a graph from 2017 through 2024. We just missed the record that was set in 2022. Out of over $74 million in permits, we missed it by about $70,000. So we were right there with that record. And I was a little disappointed on January 2nd to come in and hear the building inspector say he issued another $1.2 million permit that couldn't get out on the 31st. But we were very close to a record, and we're off to a strong start for this year. Although we didn't quite hit it on permit values, we were right there. We actually issued significantly more permits than we have in a year. So staff has been busy with the volume of permits. As with every year, there's always a few permits that drive the value, a few large permits that really drive the value. That was no different this year with a few big ones for, AR developments, rebuild, and big expansions at Tam Brands were two of the big drivers this year. So near record for permits, record year for permits issued, near record for total investment. Our revenues are up, not a surprise with that many more permits than average. Our revenues are up, and I know we're taking a look at our permit fees. We are still one of the cheapest in the state for permit fees, and there is room, I think, to increase those revenues, help cover some of the permitting inspection costs without having permit fees that are high enough to affect people's decisions on making the investments in the first place. I know we made some changes in the Lake Auburn watershed. We owe you a report on the number of new dwellings permitted, and there's only been one new dwelling permitted in the Lake Auburn watershed overlay over the past 12 months. Housing and population. We've had a lot of housing built as part of those permit numbers since 2017. I've highlighted from 2020 till now. 95 units in 2020. 2021 slowed down a little bit. 132 in 2022. Over 200 in 2023. And just shy of 100 permitted in 2024. So we are seeing population change that goes with those housing units, not surprising, but we're not seeing a lot of large family units. So I think we're seeing a lot of single people, maybe parents with one child, or couples in a unit, but not seeing a huge influx in the number of children. And we certainly haven't seen an increase in the enrollment. And I think that's changed over the last couple of decades. That used to be one of the biggest challenges for housing growth, was making room in our schools. But we really are seeing fewer, average number of children is much lower per household than it used to be. With that, happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Cousins? Council Whiting.
Just a comment, I was happy to see that company from Connecticut. I was just trying to look up their name. I couldn't find it quickly enough, but the company from Connecticut that's building next to BJ's has also got a application before the planning board on Stetson Road, which I thought was a good sign of how we're doing working with developers to get housing developed.
Yeah, they've been great to work with. Very sophisticated developer. They own a lot of units, pretty much nationwide. I think around 9,000 units, and they are rebuilding the building that burned while it was under construction, and they're pursuing that other project. I think what's unique about the new project is that it's a lot of units. It's about 180 units, but they're all in 2 and 4 unit buildings. So it's essentially building out its own neighborhood. So we haven't seen that in the other apartment projects.
Council Cowan.
Thank you for the presentation. Do you happen to have a sense of the 971 increase, relative rate of increase in Auburn compared to other municipalities?
I don't have the numbers here. I do know that in our Safe Streets for All study effort that's going on with ATRC, Auburn is the only city in Androscoggin County projected to grow over the lifespan of that plan. So that was unique. But we could get those numbers and compare them to the total county numbers at some point.
Yeah, I would note that if you look at the state economist projections, they project out 15 years, and we're the 5th largest population. All of the 4 larger ones than us are all projected to lose population between now and 2040, and Auburn's projected to increase population. Other questions or comments? Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. Again, just Eric's done an outstanding job as our planning director, just for the public and as an update for the council. This will probably be his last report here on planning stats as he's transitioning to his new role as public services director. What we found was it's really vital for economic development, transportation, engineering, code, and planning departments. Those 5 departments work really closely together and in unison with each other. And so Eric now taking that role as the executive director of public services allows him to give that real clear oversight and moving those departments all in the same direction as we look to accomplish our goals. Eric and I met today. We are in the final negotiations with a new planning director, so we hope to be able to make that announcement within the next week or two, so that we can get that initiative underway. The long-range planner ad is going out this week, so we wanted the planning director to be very much involved in that selection process, and so we a lot of great progress. Eric's giving great leadership over that transition and really putting that planning team in a really good place as we start kicking off the work that they will be doing and the comp plan committee will be doing as we roll out the new comp plan. So really exciting things from Eric on that.
Great. Thanks very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
The next item is the county commissioner delegation. So Commissioner Lewis and Commissioner Penethy is here. If you want to come up, whoever sits to the far right, you will have to hold your button down. The other one will be live. Just by way of introduction, Andrew Lewis is the District 5 rep, which is most of Auburn. Recently elected as chair of the county commission, and Jane Penethy is a new commissioner in District 6, which is Poland Mechanic Falls in the southern part of Auburn. And she was just recently elected as the vice chair. So thanks very much for coming tonight. We give you a few minutes, introduce yourself, and you could let the council know what you see forthcoming for the county, and then we'll see if councilors have any questions or comments for you.
Thank you, Mayor. So as he said, I'm Andrew Lewis. I'm the chair currently. I'm really looking forward to working with the mayor and the whole city council on all of the issues that are facing Androscoggin County. The county itself has several big projects that it wants to get started, get its feet under it, and get going. And I know that you guys do as well. So we're really eager to help you guys in any way we can, and hopefully work closely with you in the next couple of years.
Thank you.
And I'm Jane Pentheny. I am former chair of the Poland Select Board, and I took the opportunity to run for District 6. And I'm very excited to see management of government from a different perspective with the county. And I think there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve. We've got some challenges in front of us, particularly the jails, I guess. Would you agree, Andrew?
Oh, yeah. The jail is the big fish in terms of things that we're facing.
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully someone will convince the state to throw in their 35%. And if any of you feel so inclined to write your legislators, that would help us a great deal. And just point out to them that it's a tax increase for citizens if the state does not, then they contributed nothing last year. If they don't contribute to the jails as they're required by law.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments from the council? Council Platt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a quick question. What for those of us on the council as well as the public, what are the best ways to follow along the progress of county commission as well as any calls to action such as writing your legislator? How do we follow along in your progress?
So the best way is going to be to either come to our meetings, or all of our minutes and agendas are posted on our website. We just went through a whole revamp of our website, so it's much more user-friendly than it used to be, as well as mobile-friendly, which is nice, which is a nice change. And so those are the tools that I would use, especially for the public, and just especially come to our meetings. We really like it when the public comes and talks to us, especially, if they have any issues or concerns. So,
When are the meetings?
I'm sorry. So the next meeting is February 14th. We're meeting monthly currently. And the entire meeting schedule is also posted to the website. I don't have all the dates off the top of my head. It should be every third Wednesday of the month, barring holiday interference.
And they're at the county building at what time?
They are at the county building at 5:15 is when we start.
Other questions, comments? So just a couple, let's go ahead.
I was going to ask about could you elaborate a little bit on the jail, on what the issues are that are currently going on with the jail, and kind of what you'd like to see?
What we'd like to see is the state to pay their 35%, so that our property taxpayers don't get stuck with that, with a backdoor tax increase. Do you have anything more, Andrew?
So the largest issue is the fact that for the past, I want to say 10 years, but I'm not 100% certain on that date, we've been flat funded by the state. So no increase for inflation, no increase for cost of living, no increase for any changes, even though they've been issuing new rules and guidelines, especially around addiction treatment and mental health treatment. We're paying for that. You're paying for that as it happens. And so because of that flat funding, it is effectively a cut, which is what Jane, I believe, is referring to. So without an increase from the state in how much they're contributing to the jail, we're charging all of the cities more because we are constitutionally obligated to house, feed, and take care of the prisoners that were brought to us by all of the county police.
And are they saying why they're not giving you increases?
There have not been very many details on that forthcoming. It's just been mostly, I honestly haven't gotten any details on why it hasn't happened, unfortunately.
Apparently they're having a tough time with the budget this year.
Yeah.
Not that any of us are.
Other questions or comments? Just a few follow-ups relative to the jail. I guess I'd say all my comments are related to the property tax from the county, right? Because it's a significant pass-through to the municipality. So relative to jail funding, we had the congressional delegation, the state delegation in November. Lots of issues that we mentioned. One of them was the impact on the municipalities for the jail funding. We've advocated as a group that they increase the jail funding, and we have a seat on the Maine Municipal Association's Legislative Policy Committee, and the LPC, one of their initiatives this year is also related to the increase in jail funding, basically as a property tax relief issue because of the rapidly escalating costs with no increase by the state. So we'll continue to work on that. I think it's a really important issue for all the municipalities in the county. Other things I'm sure that you're aware of that the council has been interested in is 911 consolidation and the subsidies that the amount, especially from Auburn, but Lewiston as well, but the amount of subsidization of the outlying towns for their expense related to 911 And then I think the third issue I would, and to be fair about it, there's been lots of conversation about that. I don't think we've really come to a resolution. The county was not interested really in 911 consolidation, so we've been pursuing potential remedies on the subsidies, but there has been conversations about it. The other item that I would mention that the manager and I brought to the prior chair's attention on a couple of occasions is the forthcoming build-out of the operational side of the sheriff's office. The city has made the offer to work on co-location of that with a new public safety building on Minot Ave. It would literally save millions of dollars in the bond issue. And I think from a city perspective, that offer is still out there. There hasn't been a lot of interest, I don't think, in that conversation, but I think it's an important one because of the substantial downstream property tax impact of having to bond out, $4 or $5 million more to be able to have it as a standalone. Any other thoughts or comments?
Could you send us those numbers?
Excuse me?
We would love to see those numbers. Can you send them to us?
Yeah, so the manager and I can put something together and send to you.
That would be awesome, thanks.
I did also want to, I'm sorry, it got driven right out of my head, unfortunately. I did also want to, I just want to thank you for bringing up those issues. And we're happy and we look forward to working with you on all of those things. And continuing, I should say, the relationship that we've been building over the past several years.
Can you send those to us too?
Yeah, sure, we will, sure. Yep, we will.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Other questions or comments?
I'm sorry, Mayor Harmon. I realized the bond issue that you raised. That is something that we are also addressing. We are looking into alternate funding options rather than going to bond for the sheriff's office. Because of that, we have the same exact concerns that with the rising property taxes, putting a bond on top of that would be a hard sell. Mm-hmm. But the sheriff's department deserves a sheriff's office they can be proud of, and so we're trying to explore other funding options and trying to get that bond down as far as we can.
I don't think there's anybody that would dispute they need a new facility. If anyone has been over there and toured it, it is horrendous, right? It clearly does not meet the need. It's not about whether they need a new facility, it's about how we might do it. Councilor Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In addition to the cost savings, I can imagine that there is some potential efficiencies gained from being co-located. Perhaps not, but your experience in law enforcement from you two, I just think that might also be information that would be helpful to be shared with both groups as we're talking about not just financial, but the efficiency of coordination.
Other thoughts or comments? No, thank you very much. We really appreciate you coming in and spending some time with us. I think having a close working relationship with the commissioners that represent Auburn will be really beneficial to both the county and the city. So thank you very much.
Thank you for coming in.
Thanks.
Thank you for having me. And just to reiterate, my email address with the county is online. If any of you have any questions or follow-ups that you didn't think about here, feel free to email me. I'm pretty good about emailing back quickly. So thank you.
And my email is in the same exact place. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
I'm sorry.
We'll move on to the first open session of the night. If there's any member of the public that would like to address the council about an item that's not on tonight's agenda, please approach the podium and provide your name and address. Not seeing any, the open session will be closed. I will move on. Unfinished business, order 0401062025, reappropriating unspent proceeds from the city's 2023 and 2024 general obligation bonds. This will be for a public hearing and a second reading. Is there a motion?
I would move that we reallocate this as presented in the packet.
It's been moved by Counselor Whiting. Is there a second? Seconded by Counselor Walker. We'll open up the public hearing on this item, and any member of the public that would like to address the council on this agenda item, please approach the podium and provide your name and address. Not seeing any, the public hearing is closed. Discussion by the council. Mr. Manager.
Just a clarification for the council, I think. When I shared information about the vehicle component at the last meeting, I said it would be 2 vehicles. It's actually 3 vehicles. 2 were holdover from our trade-outs. 1 was one of the new vehicles. So just for that clarification.
Councilor Geary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Point of information, if both projects are up to 89,000 each, what happens if it don't get up that high? What that other money is going to be used for?
Ms. Earl.
So that would become unobligated funds that you could then reappropriate at a later date if all of those are not used. I can say that the North River Road funds will be fully expended based on that emergency repair.
May I ask another question? Given that thought, with the prospective development down there, will some of that money potentially could be taken from a TIF if they so get into a TIF to help with the repair of the roads?
Not specifically what this went to. I think you'll find that this was an emergency need. We will see that section redone when Lewiston continues their work for their secondary water line. That will be done and included in there. I believe any TIFs that come as a result of future development is going to be more as it pertains to pedestrian walkability on the Stetson section of that project.
And there is a accruing existing TIF funds related to work on North River Road, correct?
On North River, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Other questions or comments? Is the council ready for the question? Vote will be by roll call. The clerk will call the roll.
Councillor Cowan?
Yes.
Councillor Milks?
Yes.
Councillor Weisner?
Yes.
Councillor Walker?
Yes.
Councillor Platts?
Yes.
Councillor Carey?
Yes.
Councillor Whiting?
Yes.
7 having voted in the affirmative and none in the negative, the motion is adopted. We'll move on to new business. Ordinance 01012125, amending the City Code of Ordinances, Chapter 2, Administration regarding Property Tax Assistance Program. This item will be for first reading. This, to remind the council and the public, this is the Property Tax Assistance Program for those 65 and older that we earlier workshopped, that builds off the current statutory authorization for municipal property tax assistance, and this is driven off of income eligibility with a cap of $1,000. It would match the individual's property tax fairness credit up to $1,000. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Councilor Geary,
Second.
seconded by Councilor Walker. Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this item? Please approach the podium and provide your name and address. Not seeing any, public comment is closed. Discussion by the council.
Just a point of clarification, this is available for funding, but it isn't funded. It's going to be in the 2026 budget, and we choose to fund it or not.
Correct. Correct. This is just the framework of...
We're voting to approve the structure that it's going to be, not the money for it.
Correct. This is just approving the means by which it would be done, and then in each budget, the council would have to decide how much money to appropriate to the purpose.
Great. That's what I thought. I just want to make sure that's what.
Council Platt.
Yeah, I think this looks great. My question is, under section 2560, letter C, property owner applicant shall have a homestead exemption benefit in accordance with Title 36 MRS. So I'm not detailed familiar with Title 36 MRS section 681, 689. My question is, if a criteria is to have the homestead exemption benefit enacted or enabled prior to applying for this,
Right, I think.
is there a situation where someone would be prohibited from getting into our program because I'm just wondering if they should have, the need should be that they have applied to the homestead exemption as opposed to have been granted the homestead exemption, because
I think the practical effect of this, and the manager can correct me if I'm wrong here, I think the practical effect of this is that you would have to have, be a homeowner for a year, but given the 10-year homestead piece of this, that's not going to impact anybody. I think the idea behind this is that you're already maximizing the assistance that you can obtain for property tax assistance before the city engages in property tax relief.
that makes sense. I'm just wondering, is there a scenario where I apply for homestead tax exemption 6 months prior to the April 15th deadline of this, but it's not yet been approved by the state, so I actually can't apply for this? Is that
Well, it's not
a possibility?
The homestead isn't. The homestead is pretty perfunctory. If you lived in Auburn for a year and you submit a fairly minimal application, it's pretty much automatically approved. I don't think this would be an impediment.
Locally. It's approved locally.
We are in control of that approval.
Correct.
Okay, great.
Other questions or comments? Councilor Cowell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Under the same section 2-560, I know we had the question, and I would ask for a refresher around the median household income. I'm concerned about, it's under, apologize, letter E, that does not exceed the current city's median household income as determined by the U.S. Census. In 2024, that median household income for Auburn was $66,000. And I'm wondering, you know, this is intended for elderly, and I think there's probably enough in the language for the rest of it that wouldn't be a scenario, but that's pretty high, particularly because it's accounting for all mixtures of households. And so, you know, I wonder if there should be a lower level, or if you could refresh my memory, because I think we talked about this before. I'm just not remembering the answers, and I wanted to make sure I'm thinking about it correctly.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I think you have to build it off something. I think the council will retain control of this because, as Councilor Milks pointed out, we're adopting a framework, and there's language in here that prorates the amount that people are eligible for based on the appropriation. So I think we'll need some experience to see whether that ought to be adjusted or not. I think it's a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, this, you really have to look at this as a pilot. Built into here is the program administrator bringing back a report annually to the council. It'll be important to say, what applications did we receive? Did we eliminate any? You know, which ones were eliminated and why? But I think this threshold, because it's important to note that they have to demonstrate all of these, right? So by getting all of those, then you're really not, you're really narrowing who will be eligible. But we are not excluding others to be considered if they are meeting these other criteria. So, because each household, like you just said, each household is going to be very different on the makeup of the household, or the income that they bring in, but are they able to reach these other criteria as it pertains to, you know, are they receiving a tax credit? Are they receiving any other benefits? Then all that starts really narrowing down eligibility.
Great, thank you.
Councilor Geary.
No, go ahead.
I'll let Councilor, yes, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, Councilor White.
Thank you. I was just going to suggest that we could look at median household income for a family of two. I think the 66,000 is based on a household of four. And there's some kind of federal adjustment that takes it down. At least that's how it works in the housing world, where you adjust based on family size. So that would narrow the eligibility, but it might target it better. And we're going to have a tough budget year, so I'm thinking about this and just, yes, another thing to add to the budget if we choose to do that. It might be better to consider narrowing it down.
So I think my recollection of this, this is driven off census data, and it's as reported. I don't think it takes into account the number of, it could be one person, it could be 8 people in the household. It's the median of all of the reported household incomes.
Yeah, federal poverty level and some other estimates will account for different levels of number of people in the household, but the median household income is literally just what you said. And,
Council,
just for purposes of determining eligibility for federal housing programs, there's a formula that's used to ratchet down to the particular family size. And if you went down to 1, that could be quite unfair, because quite often the people that are in trouble when they're elderly, they've lost a spouse, their income has gone down. So if you set it at 2 persons, then that would be a typical married couple household, senior household. And based on the HUD formula, you could arrive at a number that wouldn't be as high as Councilor Cowan mentioned.
Councilor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is a great idea to try to figure out ways to help our seniors. As our costs go up, we keep raising our taxes, and we're taxing our seniors out of their places. I'm just not too cool with pushing the date of starting this out there. And then also the caveat of saying, if we so choose, that's going to be, I mean, I know it will potentially be driven by our budget and what we have for monies, but if a senior's counting on that, I don't want to pull the rug out from under them. And I feel by saying, well, if the council chooses not to, then we don't do it. I kind of don't like that.
Councilor Cowan.
I appreciate the intent and the sentiment that Councilor Gary is addressing. I think at the same time that flexibility, coupled with the very important point that you pointed out, Mr. Manager, that we can consider this a pilot, right? We can kind of look at things and see how it works well. That the reality is we are trying to do an important step forward to address those of our senior citizens in Auburn who are struggling financially. But there are a lot of other folks who are not seniors who are also struggling financially. And there's fixed income or fixed costs that we have to address. So I think being able to try to figure all those nuances out by getting a sense of, one scenario is every dollar we take away to give benefit to this group has to be replaced by everyone else. And so this gives us the ability to make those adjustments. And over time, I think that the sense is, at least certainly from the members, fellow councilors here on this current council, is that we do want to provide some consistency here. But this flexibility of trying to understand what's going to go on, especially when we don't know exactly what's happening with the state and the federal, I think is a well thought and benefit at least in the short term. So,
Mr. Manager.
Yeah, I think this has been great conversation. I think it's really important to take a look at the framework that's being created, and that framework is really you must meet this and then this. And so if you start taking a look at that, the intent of the program here is really, when we had the workshop, we talked about our seniors who have been in their home, their house for a long period of time, and now their income has shifted. And now how do we meet that benefit? Not somebody that came into the community and bought something maybe very recently towards retirement, and with the expectation that they could afford what they bought, right? So this is about people who are kind of aging in their home and in their place, because you have to meet that 10-year checkbox, right? They're eligible, they've been here for at least 10 years. But then, even though E is a high number, however, you must also meet D. And then once you reach D, you can see where that is slowly narrowing, potential, who we're providing this resource to. So yes, pilot, but also I think we'll see if there's any glitches in this process, which there might be. And we might need to say something that we didn't anticipate that's come forward and it's isolated somebody out that wasn't the intent. Then we can come back with an adjustment on that. And to Councilor Gary's point, I think that when we take a look at municipal budgets, it's that initial. Once you get the initial and then it's worked into that budget, then that's typically where you see, okay, there might be some increases, adjustments based on who actually qualified and how much we're actually dispensing out of that fund. But once you get that initial, the key is to try to obviously keep that. I don't think we want a repeat of what the state did with their tax stabilization program. That was a bait and switch for a lot of people. And then for many, and unfortunately not as many in Auburn, but many across the state had that reduction year one and then doubling it year two. We never want to see that. That shouldn't be our intent. However, I think this program, once that gets in place, then unless something really for the council, something that we've had a major financial crisis that might have to adjust that, but it really should be consistent moving forward. And I think that will be, I think that we've created an opportunity here for that to take place once it's initiated.
Council Platt?
Mr. Manager, do we have a decent ability to estimate the number of eligible applicants in the city based on the criteria? Obviously, we can't be perfect, but as we go into the budget process, do we have a sense of how far $100,000 might go based on the number of possible applicants?
Yeah, the team and I really started digging into some of the numbers that we know exist within the city, and started taking a look at especially who applied for the tax stabilization. That was the initial start of that process. And then started taking a look at, okay, let's really drill into our population data based on income, household income, ages. And, we're really, when we come before the budget, there'll be a line item that we're recommending, but we really believe we're somewhere in that $300,000 range as the initial. We won't know until we actually receive the applications, but that's where we're looking at. And then promoting this, I think that's the other important piece, because one of the criteria is that you filed the income tax to be able to meet this criteria. So we're actually, if you remember, we put that that postcard mailing, the mayor brought this up the other day as well. We put that on hold until this program could be included in that, so we could send that educational information out, that when you file your taxes, you need to file for this, so that if this program was available and through your budget you made funding available for it, then you would be eligible if you met all these other criteria.
Other questions, comments? Councilor Gary?
On that note, you just said that our seniors have to file income tax. Some of our seniors don't file income tax.
Right. So the property tax fairness credit and the sales tax credit are presumptive tax credits, meaning even if you don't have to pay taxes, the money is funded by the states. So you can have someone who's below the threshold to pay taxes, they still file, and if they meet the criteria, the state will basically send them a check for the property tax fairness credit. So one of the things we've done is been working with the AARP program, which is going to start up here in February. So we'll have some more information at the next meeting. But they have had a lot of success with seniors and filing for the sales tax credit a lot of these folks don't pay income tax, and it's a pretty short process for them to file in those cases. But both of these programs are already funded by the state, and they're presumptive. Other questions or comments by the council? Is the council ready for the question? Vote will be by roll call. The clerk will call the roll.
Counselor Milks?
Yes.
Counselor Weisner?
Yes.
Counselor Walker?
Yes.
Counselor Platts?
Yes.
Counselor Gary?
Yes.
Counselor Whiting?
Yes.
Counselor Cowman?
Yes.
7 have been voting in the affirmative and none in the negative. The motion's adopted. We'll move on to reports. Very brief report tonight. I had an opportunity to speak at the Lewiston Auburn Rotary Club this past week and provide them an update on current issues in Auburn and the potential challenges forthcoming in the budget process. Councilor Gary.
Nothing at this time.
Councilor Whiting.
I'd just like to note that Student Representative Agee had a third-place finish in slalom and a top 10 finish, and I think it was mixed boys and girls. That's pretty impressive.
Very nice. Councilor Cowan.
I was just pleased to see the communication from Liz about the Project Support You and the additional folks that are going to be involved in that from Spurwink. So that's can help with mental health and homeless and lots of issues, but equally important helps is valued very much, as I understand, from the fire department and the police department. So great to see that happening.
Councilor Milk.
Nothing tonight.
Councilor Wise.
Thank you. Coming up tomorrow night, the Auburn Lewiston Municipal Airport is initiating its master plan. So that will be having an open meeting, an open house, Wednesday, January 22nd from 5:30 to 7:30 at the terminal building for all those that want to come and listen to the presentation.
Thank you. Councilor Walker.
Yes, tomorrow at Maine Waste Energy, we have a executive meeting, 12 o'clock noontime. I think managers welcome tomorrow if you can make it. If you can't, we'll work on it for the next month. United New Auburn Association, Rolly's Diner, tomorrow night. We will be there next Tuesday. Don't get me confused again. And same thing with the waste management. It's next Tuesday, not tomorrow. I'm thinking we're on Mondays here. And then the 6th Street Church, the Neighborhood Watch, is Thursday on the 30th at 6 p.m. Going back to Rolly's Diner, Scott Holden from the Public Works Department will be our speaker for that evening, so come join us at 6 o'clock. The last thing I'd like to announce is the Age-Friendly Committee is collecting anything that you have to do with winter clothing, boots, hats, or anything else to try to give to the homeless people to help them out. You can call me at 577-2694, and you can find me on the computer or any place there, I'm sure. I will come pick it up if you're in the Lewiston Auburn area. We have been giving out jackets and everything for the last 2 weeks. I've been working with Paul Bernard to help him get this out to these people. It is very, very cold out there. We can use all the help we can get. Anything that's for the winters to help these people out, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Councilor Platt.
Thank you. Just some bullet points. I'll do my best to give you guys an update of the previous school committee meetings. So item number 1, after you guys will remember I reported on the high school needing to install a geothermal meter at the school in order to qualify for, I believe, up to $3 million in rebates from the federal government. There was some doubt as to whether or not the contractor would be able to get that in time and successfully. After some back and forth, the school department is happy to announce that the contractor was able to install that meter. That puts us back in the running for this rebate from the feds. I believe there's an agreement between, or not a formalized agreement yet, but the plan is to have those funds come back to the city and be earmarked for certain capital projects having to do with development and sustainability. So, yep, so that's great news for the school department and the city. Number two, an update from the Edward Little High School gym that had water damage several months ago and affected certain sports, including, I believe, volleyball throughout the fall. I don't know if it encroached on the beginning of the basketball season or not. It did, Steve, yep. They're back in it now. So the work was done to fix the ducting on the roof, to fix floorboards, and to fix affected bleachers as well. So it was a significant, there was damage. It was covered by insurance, though. So everything's all good. We're back, and through good partnerships between the different schools, St. Dom's and other holders of athletic facilities, we were able to, the school department and athletic department was able to manage everything. So that's great. Lastly, two financial items that are actually going to be voted on in tomorrow's meeting, but I think are important for us as counselors to know about. The school department will be voted out of finance committee. We'll be voting in our meeting tomorrow to reallocate $71,000 from unallocated funds in the fiscal year 21 capital improvement plan. I'm sure this stuff happens every year. Only important thing to note there is of that $71,000, 35 of it was going to be asked for in the fiscal year CIP, presumably. So I certainly raised my hand and said, if we're not spending it then we should be asking for $35,000 less in our next CIP request. Whether or not that happens, we'll see, but that's a horse that I beat dead every time it comes up, is just because we're moving money around doesn't mean we get to spend more of it. So we'll be voting on that tomorrow night. If anybody has any feedback, feel free to call me or email me tomorrow. Happy to chat about that. And lastly, there will be an item on tomorrow's agenda addressing LRTC cost sharing. Up until this moment in time, there's been a formula for cost sharing with recent increases in LRTC programming, specifically at Edward Little High School and beyond. I believe they're looking to redefine the cost-sharing model to be very simple. Auburn would be responsible for paying its share of certain costs relative to the number of students in the program. So if we have 20 students in the program, we shoulder 20% of certain costs. I don't believe it's all the costs. There's some state reimbursement in there. I can dig into the details if anybody would like, but I think it's another important thing for us to be able to speak about if any constituents ask us. So tomorrow's meeting, there will be an additional vote and hopefully some discussion on the proposed LRTC cost-sharing model. And that's all I've got. Our school department meeting is tomorrow at 6 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to make sure I provided an update to the order that Councilor Gary had made at the last meeting. What I'm providing is an update to the city's SOP as it pertains to warming and cooling and charging locations. The staff and myself really assess what's currently being provided in the community. What days of operation are those services being provided, as well as what facilities do we have, we've identified, and what criteria would we meet to initiate a warming, cooling, charging location, or even something that would be as a result of emergency declared a shelter as a result of some type of disaster or need within the community. So I wanted to make sure you had this policy. First, I guess before I jump to the policy, just what we have currently for services, and this is referring to daytime services within the community. There's currently the Trinity Jubilee Center, which is open Monday through Saturday from 7:30 a.m. to 3 p.m., and the Drop-In Center, which is currently located on Pleasant Street, soon to be located at 121 Mill Street, is open Wednesday from 9 a.m. to 12, and Saturday 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And so we identified that we currently have decent coverage from Monday through Saturday. So where our gap and availability of resources, both for Lewiston and Auburn, is really on that Sunday schedule. So as we've been working through an agreement with the drop-in center, what their board will be reviewing tonight is an MOU that we drafted to assist in coverage from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. at the Auburn Resource Center at 121 Mill Street for coverage there to be able to open that facility when we meet certain criteria as far as temperatures. So the MOU, as it's currently drafted, we'll see how it goes through their meeting tonight, but as it's currently drafted is that if the temperatures are forecasted to fall below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, then that would trigger, along with a 72-hour notice from the city, that we would need them to stand up and operate that space within the resource center to be a drop-in, and this is targeting our homeless community to be able to provide that space for a warming space. They will provide some of their basic services that they provide for our homeless community, not to the extent of what they currently provide on Monday and Wednesdays. So this will be more of a streamlined service. We are having conversations through the assistance of Councilor Walker and talking with Pastor Bernard, who was here at the last council meeting, about ensuring that we also have some food abilities to be able to serve food on that day as well. And so we're working through that with another collaborative on that initiative. So that's the intent that we have moving forward. If you take a look at the policy, which has now really been written as this policy is really focusing on power outages within the city that then would trigger, if a power outage of greater than 100 residents and their heating or cooling systems within their home are not meeting their needs, and then the temperatures meet the requirements that we've stipulated, then that triggers providing space for locations for the warming and the cooling. And then you will see within here that we identified level 1, which is predefined as one of our locations for facilities, is the Auburn Senior Community Center that has a generator, it's accessible, it's a single story, it has cooking facilities. So that is our level 1. And then level 2 facilities, these are the facilities that if we had to create an emergency response because of a natural disaster or widespread power outages, that we would need to trigger overnight accommodations based on an emergency declaration, which we're allowed to do under that criteria. Then we identified actually 4 locations within the city that could meet that need. First being the Auburn Senior Community Center, as I identified above, the Hasty Memorial Gym that has a generator availability, single story, cooking facilities, the Ingersoll Turf Facility, which also has a generator, single story and accessible, and then the soon-to-be PAL Center, which also meets all those same criteria. So we really have a lot of locations within the city that we could operate a more detailed emergency response for sheltering. However, daytime, when needs arise, the senior center will be the location that we've really identified. So this policy is very separate than the work that we're doing for our homeless community and the resources that we have available for that. You'll notice that on here, I did not include 121 Mill Street as one of the locations, because that will be used for our homeless community, and not to mix that so that there's confusion. Any questions?
Questions from the council? Councilor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Given those response people from Spurwink that are going off with our officers and the fire department to diffuse situations, can they be utilized if the temperatures like tomorrow are going to be horrendous? If we have a bunch of homeless that need places to go, can they, if we can get into one Mill Street of property, can they open it up and man people to place so those that are cold homeless will have a place that they can go? And then the second part of my question is, has the city talked with Cadence Kitchen to see if those that come to our shelter that are portable, I know there's issues if they have grocery carts and a lot of baggage, that's not so easy to transport. But if they're easily transported, at this point in time, there is no way to get from Mill Street property to Cadence Kitchen unless they get a ride or walk. And that's a little bit of a distance in tomorrow's weather.
You specifically talking about tomorrow? Is that what you're asking?
Tomorrow or anytime, because the reason I pulled this out for an the reason I had the rules suspended, put the thing on the agenda, discuss the agenda, was to prepare for the coming cold weather that I didn't know we were going to get this week. And then also to cover when there's no place if there's a holiday. Because like the first time we had said that people could go to Norway Savings, which was a bust because one, it was too far out and it was very busy. People didn't read the whole notice and they thought they could get into the library and couldn't because they weren't open. With yesterday's holiday, those that were homeless could not possibly go into the library because I don't think it was open, and there was other places that were closed. So I'm trying to prepare so that we don't find a person passed away on the street. I understand that those that can will try to hunker down because they don't have the means or ways to get to Cadence Kitchen. I just want to see if we can come up with a solution to make sure nobody that needs a place to spend a night is going to be stuck in a snowbank.
I think, Counselor, you and I had a conversation this weekend regarding the holiday on Monday, and as I shared that day that we spoke, Trinity Jubilee Center was open. We called and ensured that there was a resource available for Monday. We did not receive the occupancy permit for 121 Mill Street until today. If there was not going to be an option on Monday that was available, we would have identified one of our facilities, we would have opened that up, and we would have made something available. But there was a resource that was available in the community that was available on Monday. There is a resource available all this week. We will watch the weather for Sunday, and if there's an indication that this cold snap does not shift, then we're prepared to go ahead and initiate the MOU for the Resource Center on Mill Street to be open and to be coordinated with the team from the drop-in center. They're aware of that. We've had conversations about that. So that will initiate right away. And so I think that's the gap. I think we've identified that gap and will provide those necessary services on that day. Your other comment was regarding transportation. We're not providing transportation. Our homeless community does tend to traverse between the two cities. That happens. We see that. We're also the center is not equipped as far as providing storage location for shopping carts. I think we talked about that when we talked about the initial phase on that was not going to be the intent of that location, to make sure that was available. That is that's a challenge that is, that community definitely works through and finds some solutions on, but it's certainly a challenge. So those are the areas that we currently identified for the council. Right now, we're not seeing that emergency need right now for any other service as it pertains to our homeless community. Is this meeting everyone's needs? Absolutely not. But are there at least a level of service that's being provided and available? Yeah, it is currently, except for that Sunday.
Could we please also talk with Caden's Kitchen? From my understanding, which could be wrong, they're only picking up people in Lewiston around Kennedy Park. Is there any chance you guys could talk together so that if we have people at the Mill Street property and it's weather like this and they need a ride that are mobile, can we try to work out something with Caden's Kitchen since they've got 2 vehicles?
So I already, not specific to 121 Mill Street, but I raised this question with Lewiston. And the only transport that's being provided is from one location. I don't recall, I think it's at 7:30 they stop and they run continuously until it opens at 8. And the only pickup spot is Kennedy Park. They're not, I think there was, not necessarily with Councilor Geary, but I think there was some misunderstanding by some other folks that had called me that thought that the warming center folks were driving all over Lewiston picking people up. That's not the case. So I don't see, at this point, they're using those 2 vans for that service. There didn't seem to be any capacity to come to Auburn to pick up or go elsewhere in Lewiston with what they currently have. They just go to the one location. Other questions on this topic for the manager? Do you have further, Mr.
That's
Manager?
it. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to the finance reports. Ms. Earl.
All right, so I have 2 finance reports for you this evening. I'll start with the November, ask for your vote, and then we'll move on to December. For the November report, I did note on there that the revenue comparison discrepancy in the clerk's department that I had mentioned in the last report was due to marijuana business licenses in FY24 going into the commercial license line rather than its own separate marijuana business license line. So they don't have a large commercial license discrepancy or loss of business there. It was simply coded to the wrong section in FY24 when software was changing. That's now separated out, and you'll see that in further FY25 reports. Of note, we are waiting for the school department imports for general fund revenues and expenditures. So the percentage comparison is off because our total general fund includes the school. I did note that in the expenditures, if we are comparing without that inclusion, we are much more comparable to historical, rather than the 25.5% that it's showing for expenditures right now. We would be around 47.15 as compared to 42.4. So much closer to historical numbers if we're not looking at those totals that are supposed to generally include school. I'm going to move on to the arena and Ingersoll, which are quite far down in the report, so bear with me for a moment. The Norway Savings Bank Arena has begun its operating fiscal gain. So they tend to operate at a loss in the beginning of the season, then move on to making their gains. So we have reached that point in their budget, and they are right on par with historical for revenues. So that's good to see, especially with that big project they had with the rink. And the Ingersoll turf facility is also in their operating gain. They're at $76,840 as of November. So really positive reports overall, minus the hiccup with school, which I did also note in the report that we have met with school leadership and created a timeline for getting those imports in. But the next few reports, you'll notice that discrepancy in the percentage comparisons, and I will continue to show without that inclusion for the city side, just so you have a better idea of historic to actual for us.
So a couple follow-up questions on that. In this, it references that you're waiting for reports for 3 periods. Is that quarterly reports or monthly?
The school department imports,
Right.
they are supposed to be monthly.
So they've reported some for this fiscal year and are 3 months behind? Is that right?
Correct.
Is that
Correct. We received their September import this month.
And the timeline that you just mentioned, can you give us an idea of, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, what's the anticipated schedule that they're going to be able to catch up and then stay on monthly imports?
So the anticipated schedule is every couple of weeks we'll get a new import from them. So it should only be a couple of months before we're completely caught up. We were supposed to receive the September by December 30th. They've had some staff changes. I think Councilor Platts is probably fully aware of this, that their payroll staff has swapped out. So they've been trying to play catch up as well, which I understand. But we are having to hold to that new deadline and timeline. So we are working through that.
And they anticipate once they catch up, they'll be able to maintain it current?
Yes, so Joe is their new import person for us. He's very good. He understands exactly what we're looking for. So he knows what we need, and he's been working with us on that timeline as well. So we expect that once they're caught up, they'll be perfectly on time moving forward.
Great, thank you. Anything further?
So that's it for November. I would ask for the vote on November before we move to December.
Sure, is there a motion?
Motion to move.
Moved by Councilor Walker, is there a second? Seconded by Councilor Cowan. Any discussion? Vote will be by show of hands, all in favor. Opposed, 7 having voted in the affirmative, none in the negative, the motion is adopted.
Okay, so moving on to the financial report for ending December 31 of 2024. Again, without the inclusion of school figures, their revenues are at 50.2, which as compared to December of 2023 was 56.7. We are closer to historical. It's a little bit harder to compare just because those historicals do so include some of the schools, but we don't have any major variances that we have concerns about there other than those school imports. Expenditures were similar without the inclusion from school. Comparable to historical was at 54.5, not the 29.7 that the reports show without that. So again, close to historical. We're feeling comfortable with those numbers, have no large variances that we felt needed to be brought. As for Ingersoll and Norway, Norway had 31.9% of their budget compared to 38.7 actual for December 23. Again, that rink project did put them behind, but they're catching up, so we're looking at positive numbers for them. Excited about that. Their expenditures were at 36.7 of the budget. The actuals for December of 23 were 51%. There have been some staff shifts in quite a few departments, but we have not billed the arena for some of their electricity costs, which come through the city for December. It's now January. We will have that complete picture and everything billed, and that will be included in the January 2025 period 7 report. So their operating net gain will be much better at that time. Ingersoll Turf Facility, they are at an operating net gain of $91,000. That's on par for what we expect from them at this time of year. Their revenues were at 45.5 compared to historical of 48, so very close. And their expenditures were at 19.9 as compared to 20.8. So again, right on par with historical, no issues with their operating. Again, no large variances beyond what has been mentioned.
Any questions on the December report? No, is there a motion?
Motion to move.
Moved by Council Walker.
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Cowan. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? 7 having voted in the affirmative, none in the negative. The motion's adopted. Thank you very much, Mr. Earl. We'll move on to the second open session of the evening. Any member of the public who would like to address the council on an item that's not on tonight's agenda, please approach the podium and provide your name and address. Seeing none, the public session will be closed. There's no further business for the council. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Moved by Council Wisner. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Council Walker. All those in favor? Council will be adjourned.